Well, she is gone.
You keep saying that.
We are talking mail order monsters. And this one comes to us on VOD on the 6th of November 2018. This one is directed by Paulina Lagudi, who also co-wrote this with Mark Prey. And this one stars Carpenter, who you may know from Buffy and Angel fame, along with Hopkins, who's been in a variety of TV shows and such. I know him from Cougar Town. And you've got a young girl here called Madison Horcher, who plays this young girl called Sam, who the story kind of focuses on. And she is this kind of like small, diminutive kind of girl who has a bit of a tragic past. Her mother was killed in an accident that she kind of feels responsible for. And her father has got this new girlfriend played by Carpenter, and she's feeling a little bit like threatened by it, basically. She's just also getting bullied at school from this girl who they used to be friends with, and now it's kind of like they've fallen out. And she feels a little bit down, so she kind of orders this kind of this creature, this mail order monster from an advert in a comic. And it's like those old kind of adverts that you used to get in American comics that I used to love reading when I was a kind of a kid. And it was, you know, I always wondered what would turn up. And this one apparently costs $20 and you get a fully working robot, but there you go. Anyway, so this kind of huge kind of robot kind of turns up, and doesn't work as you'd probably expect from something you're going to buy from the back of a comic book, but there may be some type of other forces that work that make this thing come alive, and shenanigans ensue. So let's discuss Mail Order Monster. So we'll go with the positives first of all, and this one has a huge one, and that is Madison Horcher, who plays Sam, this our primary protagonist film. What a great little actress. She is really good. I mean, child actors are kind of renowned to be somewhat difficult, and quite often you'll see if movies, especially kind of lower budget ones, where you don't like to kind of point out that there's some poor acting by child actors, but this one, she is great. She really portrays a layered character who has different kind of emotional responses to different kind of stimuli and things like that. I thought she was an absolute fantastic little actress, and definitely one to watch out for. But to be fair, all of the cast here are pretty good in regards to their acting ability. So, hats off to the cast and also to the director, who I feel really got some decent kind of performances from the cast here. And there's some good kind of emotional beats there. And when you're meant to feel kind of like a little bit, tear in the eye, it'll get you and stuff like that. So again, the director knows how to kind of like, make the audience kind of feel emotive in kind of certain scenes when you're kind of supposed to. The first kind of like, I would say, third of this movie, the first act, plays more like a kind of a serious kind of a drama. And to be honest with you, that was my favourite part of the movie, because before we get to the kind of the monster part. And it's because the acting is so well. I think the characters are kind of quite well kind of like drawn out and seem like kind of real people. But it is a kids movie, so then we kind of introduce the monster, and it kind of goes a little bit kind of more kind of like silly and kind of like science fiction, so to speak. But the first third, is a kind of touching, somewhat kind of like saccharine family kind of drama, and then the last two thirds we introduce this kind of like this robot kind of character, and kids may still like it, but then we're gonna move on to the negatives now. So normally with the review, I try and stay away from rewriting the script, because I like to review the movie that I have watched. But I'm going to take an exception with this movie, because one of the main problems with this film is that very little happens. There's no real story in as such. It's just this kind of girl struggling with the fact that she has kind of a potential new stepmom. She's getting a little bit bullied, and there just happens to be this kind of like this monster. The actual monster, this kind of robot, is peripheral. It really doesn't affect. You could take that kind of character out, and the story would play out exactly the same. The actual mail order monster is called Mom, a little bit on the nose. We'll come on to that. yeah, it's just kind of like irrelevant, to be quite honest, because it really doesn't do anything. I mean, it just doesn't. There's nothing for it to do. It's just kind of like wandering around beside her and doesn't really kind of get involved in the plot, if I'm honest. I mean, a little bit at the end, but I still feel the movie would have kind of turned out the same way had it not even been there. So to me, what I would have done is maybe, and this is a kids' film, so you could kind of make it a cautionary movie. I may have had a kind of antagonist. There's no real bad guy in this movie. Even the bully plot is kind of resolved very early on. I would have maybe had, you could have had some sort of like child kind of like, you know, guy who's kind of like approaching children in a kind of a little bit of a sinister way. You don't have to go, you know, you don't have to spell it out what's going on, but you could just have a kind of a don't talk to strangers kind of message within this movie, because obviously this movie is made for kids. So I would have had this this kind of maybe like some kind of predatory guy kind of, and then this robot can actually obviously defend this girl against this, you know, some type of antagonist, basically. But you also get that kind of like, you know, don't talk to stranger kind of message in there as well, because ultimately this movie doesn't go anywhere. It's just a family drama about a girl who ultimately has a problem with the new potential stepmom, and it just happens to be a robot hanging around. That's literally the story. So then we're going to come on to it a little bit more, because I would say the acting is so good here, and the kind of the first style of the movie sets up a kind of somewhat kind of realistic tone. We get the robot kind of coming in, and it's just not very well developed. I mean, it's hinted at that the robot is something to do with a dead mum, but it's never really expanded upon, and we still don't know how the robot is alive and sentient, if it actually is anything to do with mum, because it never seems to kind of, and this is mild spoilers there, it never seems to kind of say that it is, or have any kind of recognition of any of the characters. It's to be completely kind of its own thing. But there's a kind of a scene where it hints maybe that the mum spirit is inhabiting it, but it's just never kind of referenced again. I mean, like I said, it's called Mom, Mail Order Monster, so this girl calls it Mum. Mom. We say Mum, M-U-M in the UK. But anyway. But yeah, it's just a weird little plot thread that is just kind of hinted at and then never really kind of touched on again. It's just left hanging. And then we get to the kind of like the climax, and the movie attempts to do an action scene, so the robot kind of starts to go wrong for no apparent reason. It just does, and it ends up, you know, trying to be a little bit violent. So, but you never really get why it's doing that or why it's going after particular people. And then it looks like they haven't actually filmed this sequence. So what they've done is the actual, I suppose, action sequence, so to speak, they've actually put like comic panels on it, and it just kind of narrates it. So it looks like that part of the movie was never actually filmed, and it's just kind of like patched over this with this kind of like comic couple of strips. And it does it a couple of more. I mean, I've got the feeling they've obviously done that, and then kind of made a few other kind of little comic strips to do a little bit of backstory. But this isn't the backstory. It's not a flashback. It's the, you know, it's the thing. So it looks like that scene was just never filmed, and then they've just done this to kind of like patchwork it over. And that's kind of it. You know, that's the thing with this film. There's just very little to it. So it's a pleasant movie. I think it's very well acted. I think it's quite well shot. You know, it all looks kind of very kind of like well photographed. I think it's very kind of well lit. But the actual things involving the actual mail order monster itself, this creature, are poorly handled in both the writing, the execution, what it actually does, and the movie just doesn't feel like it goes anywhere. So I would have had a little bit more to do, more kind of like getting the actual monster involved a little bit more. But it works kind of as a kind of a drama and a very kind of like kids movie. But I just don't think for a kids movie, I don't think it's particularly interesting, because there's just not a lot that happens. So it's a weird. I'm not quite sure who this is aimed at, if I'm honest. I mean, it's trying to be very. I mean, maybe they kind of decided we won't do an action scene because we'll just have these comic panels, so we don't want to show violence. But I don't know. It's just bizarre that who is this movie for? Because I'm telling you, kids are going to be like, boring, nothing happens. You know, and I wasn't bored because I quite like the performances, but story-wise, it's just very flat. It's certainly not a bad film. I don't think it's you know, it's really kind of lives on the strength of its actors here, and some fairly good characterization. But even then, I would say, I mean, the dad and the kind of Charisma Carpenter's girlfriend, they seem a little bit too perfect. I mean, they're good, you know, nice people, and you kind of like, you root for them, and they seem super kind of you know, loving and everything, but maybe a little bit too much. I don't think realistic. Again, it's a kid film, so you're never going to have, you know, very realistic, you know, depictions of people, but nonetheless, I don't know. So to me, it felt like this movie needed a bit of more of a rewrite. Maybe it needed a little bit more budget to have this robot doing some more things, and I don't know why this scene had this kind of, the one action scene that it has in the movie was just kind of like pasted over with a weird comic panel. Who knows? So a bizarre film in the fact that there's some good stuff, there's some good solid filmmaking on display here, and some decent work by the cast. But the script has just got nothing to do with this monster, and even it just kind of goes into some silly unresolved plot threads, some silly logic, and you know, yeah, a whole bunch of problems really. A whole little nitpicky things I could go on about, but I'm not going to. Anyway, so I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. I think it's a watchable film for the right audience, but I don't know who that audience is. So have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.